Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I'm Katherine Reynolds Lewis, and I am so excited for this episode. I learned a lot from Sunnie Clahchischiligi Dine, who is the Indigenous Affairs Editor at High Country News and a doctor of rhetoric. She has a PhD in that field, so we talked about that in this episode. We also went over all the things that she's looking for in terms of high country news pitches. So tune in if you'd like to learn how to pitch better for that magazine and others. We also talked about Indigenous affairs and why every media organization needs an Indigenous affairs desk, and what some of the different expectations that she and other editors have when pitching a story that involves Indigenous communities or touches on those issues that matter to Indigenous communities and tribes. So hope you enjoy the episode, and I learned a ton, so I suspect you will as well. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited for this episode today. I'm Katherine Reynolds Lewis, the founder of the Institute for Independent Journalists, whose mission is the financial and emotional sustainability of freelancers of color. Today, I am talking with Sunnie R. Clahchischiligi Dine, who is the Indigenous Affairs Editor at High Country News. She's from the town of Tisnapas on the Navajo Nation in Arizona, and an award-winning journalist who's reported for the Navajo Times, the Osage News, The Guardian, USA Today, the New York Times, many others that impress me. And she also serves on the board of directors for the Indigenous Journalists Association. And I'm really excited to dig into your career. And thank you so much, Sunnie, for being here with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation.
So why don't we just start by giving us a bit of an overview of your career and the path that you took to get to where you are now.
Yeah, you would think that this would become easier over time, but the more things you do, the longer the list gets. So
yes.
I should first start by appropriately introducing myself. Sunnie Clahchischiligi Ayan Shiak, Azislana A. Bashashin Ashin A Dashache Do, but Ani A Dashanala. I'm sorry. That is how I appropriately introduce myself in the Navajo language, identifying myself within my own community, and then those who are within my community but have moved elsewhere. So I'm originally from a town called Tisnapas, Arizona, like at least that's the English version of it. Within that town, we've got these kind of local areas that are known to the locals. And within the town, I'm from a place called Goat Springs, Arizona, which is just at the base of the Carrizo Mountains. And that's important to me because that's really where if we're talking about my career, that's really where it began. I spent a lot of time, because I grew up on the reservation, I spent a lot of time within my community and throughout my community because I grew up with my grandmother watching me a lot of the time when I was younger because my parents worked and had to commute to the city off the reservation. And so I was kind of left to my own devices, and she realized that could be a bad thing. So she's the one who kind of introduced me to the language and a lot of cultural knowledge, traditional knowledge that is a huge part of what I'm able to do with my career as a storyteller. And so I grew up there, went to a boarding school at the last, when it was still a boarding school, when we could still have boarding schools. And then it took a kind of a windy route to journalism. I always tell people that I fell into journalism, which I think is somewhat common at this point. The more and more I've talked to people, it's a very common thing. Didn't know a journalist, knew nothing about journalism. My father would religiously read the local newspaper every day. And I started really getting into reading because I felt like that's just what you do. But if you grew up on the reservation, there's not a whole lot else you could do as well. So, but I didn't realize that was something that I should be doing or even wanted to do until I took a journalism class at a community college right after high school and did pretty badly at it. I think I got a pretty low grade, but someone saw how excited I was about it, that someone being my instructor at the time, and kind of nudged me towards this program that no longer exists, but was really what threw me into this career was an organization called the American Indian Journalism Institute, which was founded by two journalists, including one Osage both whom worked for the Washington Post, which is how they knew each other. And so they brought a lot of us somewhat older generation of Native journalists into this field and really helped guide us. And so I owe a lot to that organization and to the people, and one of which is still my mentor today. I've been in journalism for 20 years now, and he's been with me every step of the way. So so that's really where it started. But I spent most of my career as a sports writer. And really that was just a result of being one of two daughters. I was kind of the son my father never had. And so I followed him to every sport event. I was just really into it. And so after covering business, night cops, all of these different desks and beats through internships, I finally just realized that sports was what I really enjoyed, because it wasn't really about sports. It was about people, which I really loved. And so I did that for the Navajo Times for 12 years. And so I've before that interned at a number of places, including Sports Illustrated and the Salt Lake Tribune, the Minneapolis, in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So I've been here and there, but loved working for my people, loved working for my community, in my community. And so I did that for a long time. And then just decided to challenge myself a little bit more, went back to school, had no plans of that either, fell into that, decided to go into English and not journalism. And I think the big reason for that was it was a little bit of a scare, because the industry at the time was really moving towards technology and downsizing, not necessarily the Navajo Times, but it's very like me to think as far as ahead as possible. And so that was me just creating some insurance for myself. And so, and it was really it was answering a call, because there was such a need for it in my community. I took a part-time job as a writing tutor at a tribal community college, and saw that there were a lot of non-Navajos teaching English, and only non-Navajos teaching English. And that didn't sit well with me, to be frank. And so that's what spearheaded this, other kind of career track that I took, and went back to school and got my PhD in rhetoric and writing from the University of New Mexico. And then, of course, the pandemic threw me back into journalism. I was proudly saying I had retired from journalism when I started my PhD program, only to have the pandemic come back and say, no, you're not done yet. And so did not like the representation of Indigenous people in the coverage of the pandemic, especially mainstream coverage. So knowing the tools that I had, knowing the ability that I had, I could not do it, essentially. So, and now I'm here doing all of that, essentially. Got a really nice opportunity here at High Country News as the editor. Again, something I was not thinking about. I loved reporting, loved being on the ground. I know what that's like. Did freelancing for a part of my career as well. And so that's kind of the short version of my journey to this point.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sunnie. And I appreciate how you are not just giving us your resume, but also why you made the choices you made, which I think makes some of these conversations we have at the IIJ different from other journalism spaces. And I really want that in this podcast and our community, because I think so often for a lot of us, that's the case as well, right? That I started the IIJ because I wanted to fill a void that I felt in, the industry of a space that centered both journalists of color and freelancers, and where we're able to question and deconstruct some of the, journalism principles that maybe we learned in newsrooms that may not work for us anymore. So really appreciate that. And of course, we also all stand on the shoulders of our teachers, right? Our parents and grandparents and mentors. And I really appreciate you bringing that into this conversation. So maybe start at the end at High Country News. Can you talk a little bit about, what it's been like for you, first of all, being an editor, and what you're looking for in terms of the kinds of contributions you might seek from freelancers? What's what is are you mostly accepting pitches? Or are you giving in assignments? Or how do you typically work with freelancers?
Yeah, so for in terms of how it's been a whirlwind, to be honest, but in a good way, because I actually came in as interim and did that for about 6 months, and just quite frankly was not planning to stay. But I got a taste of it. I was just kind of giving something a try. I just graduated. I wasn't really sure which route I wanted to take. And so I was like, well, if there's a time to just kind of take an opportunity and just go with it, this is it. So that's what I did. And I really enjoyed it. I did. So when it came time to call for applications and I went through that process, the more I got into it, the more I realized that it was where I was supposed to be. And so, I don't take these kind of opportunities lightly. I think that, when things come up, they do for a reason. And so, it was a lot of fun. And I think the thing that I enjoyed the most was that when I first started, what I enjoyed the most was working with my staff of 2 writers. I have an associate editor, Anna Smith, and then I have B. Toasty, who is the staff writer for Indigenous Affairs. And so it's nice to have this team to work with. And that's the only place that's what makes HCN, I think partly what makes HCN unique is the fact that we have this little team. And so it allowed me to do the things that I love to do most in both careers, which is the mentoring aspect. I love to be able to give back in that way and to help these writers learn, one, who they are as writers and individuals, but also how they can contribute and be able to contribute to that contribution. And so this job really allowed me to do that. And I guess I wasn't thinking that when I took on the task, but now it's turned into more than that. That's still very much on the top of my list of one of the things that I enjoy most about this work, but it's also really getting a sense of Indigenous communities outside of my own. I mean, while I've had some of that experience, one can't have it all, one can't know it all. And so I love to learn, which might explain part of the degree aspect of it too, the academic endeavors, but I love learning and I love being able to be in a position where I can learn about other individuals who have somewhat similar experiences. And so, it's been great. I mean, the first couple of months as a full-time permanent position employee, those were a little bit rough making that transition, but we've since gotten over that hump, and it's been a lot of fun. There are some challenges, which one of them is getting freelancers, getting writers, because it's a nice challenge, and I think I'm in a good position to do it. It's just something that doesn't happen overnight. And so yeah, and I think in terms of what we're looking for and where we're at with the desk, we're always looking for pitches, and we have a lot of variety, and I even want to say flexibility, because every Indigenous Affairs editor who has come in and who has had this role brings something different. They have a different vision, and I think for me, because the mentoring aspect is a huge importance to me, I'm very much about trying to bring in maybe some new writers that we haven't heard from, or some that are wanting to try something new. I've been working with a number so far that's been really just in the planning stages, but that's building those relationships take time, especially within Indigenous journalism. And so we are open to pitches. We are actively seeking. Again, we're constantly seeking. And in terms of what we're looking for, I mean, we're constantly trying to expand our coverage in different areas. I think a real difficult region for us, because we typically cover the West, which includes Alaska, is Alaska Native coverage. And so that's been a task I know not just for me, there have been other organizations or Indigenous journalism organizations that have been, looking for the same thing. And so that's a huge point of interest for me in terms of freelancers, just because we have so many good resources that we could use for that coverage.
And when you think about starting that relationship with a potential new freelancer, what's the best way for someone to approach you? Is it with a specific story idea or a letter of introduction? And is that process different for an Indigenous versus a non-Indigenous journalist?
Yeah, I think I think it's a little bit of, my favorite answer is it depends. So I think it very
That's
much
fine.
it very much depends. I like to work in the gray area sometimes, but I'll give an example of what I thought was a really nice pitch that it didn't really go anywhere, but it made me excited that this kind of stuff was happening, because I always think of myself in that position or those positions that perhaps freelancers are in. And I was at a conference, just kind of a local conference, just kind of seeing what was happening and working on a potential story and getting some, just really just being in the community was what I was doing. And so I had this, there was a local reporter who was there who I did not know. And she just came up to me and said, "I'm so-and-so. I work for wherever, and, I'm really interested in doing some work for you if you're looking." And I was like, "Yeah, like, just let me, do you have a card or something?" And so we exchanged cards, and I ended up being the one to email her first because I was so excited about it. And so it just turned out that she had jumped on this huge project. And so we weren't able to work together, and haven't, but I'm sure that potential's still there. But, that was, I would like to think that I'm approachable enough for someone to say, "Hey, yeah, they're here. Let me talk to this person." I really appreciated that, because I try to be in places where people can have the opportunity to do that. But when it comes to, not meeting not having the opportunity to meet in that way, I'm happy for someone to just reach out and say, "I'm so and so," perhaps through email. Usually through email is best, to reach out and say, "I'm so and so. I have the story idea." If it's an Indigenous person, actually, it really, it's about the same process for an Indigenous person and a non-Indigenous person, because I tend to have this, I do have this list of questions, if you will. So it's somewhat of my interview process, for those who have pitches for the Indigenous Affairs desk. And that's really just to make sure that all of the boxes are being checked in terms of what our focus is on for Indigenous affairs. And so to be more explicit about that, the person can send a pitch and we can talk about that pitch, or I might send some foundational questions about the pitch. But more importantly, my first questions are usually not about the pitch itself. It's about, what work are you doing with this community? What work have you done? What is your relationship? What is your past experience in working in this community? And I think the big one, how do you know they even want you to tell the story? Because for me, the focus point is very much on the Indigenous community themselves, because it's very easy as journalists for us to think that, this is going to be such a great story. And that very well may be, but we also have to think about how these stories are going to serve the communities in which we're writing about. And so I have a list of questions beyond that I typically ask people. But, I get pitches in different forms from different people. And sometimes I feel that I've gauged a good enough ability to figure out, what the right approach is in terms of bringing someone on. If I think someone needs a little bit more development or work, I send them, resources their way to help them with that. And so, because sometimes I do have the capacity to help with that, but it's not all the time, that I'm able to say, okay, this is worth sitting down and helping this person through. But, if there were more of me, absolutely.
Great. And when you think about the sort of length of stories, I'd love to hear just some nuts and bolts of how much freelance work do you run versus with your two staff writers, and sort of what would an ideal story length, or, sort of the type of idea that you would really jump at?
Yeah, so we have, there's a range at High Country News, and I mean, that goes for the Indigenous Affairs desk too. I'm allotted to, it depends on the story as well. And so we could have a story, let's say I get a pitch that's something that's a little bit more quick turnaround. And then I would then work with a different editor to get that. And so that could be a combination of working with me, perhaps just on the Indigenous part of the coverage, and then working with that other editor. And that's important too, because then we're talking about, well, where does the funding come from for this? And so, that gets a little bit, I guess, confusing, or it can be. So I say that just because I can't give a number of like how many stories freelance wise are we able, because we could have an Indigenous affairs centered story that comes from an entirely different part of our budget, right? And so
Yeah.
so it depends, because I work closely with the other desk, or we work closely with the other desks, like the investigations team. There was just a huge investigation that was very much IID related, but it fell in our investigation, and so those saw some like split costs. And so, things like that happen. And then, so it depends on the nature of the story too. If it's a feature, if this is a story that's meant just for the web, because HCN also publishes a print magazine. And so, and freelancers are able to publish in the print magazine. But what happens is it's really just up to a team of editors to decide what stories make that print edition.
Yeah. And maybe give an example of like a web story that's a quick turn might be like how many words versus a longer feature, just so people have a sense of the range.
Yeah, so something you would typically see, it depends on what part of the magazine it falls into as well. So the front of the book, I think, runs anywhere from around like 1,200 words. A web story, obviously, there's way more flexibility for that. And then at that point, I think it comes more down to, because the word count equals how much money is paid out to the freelancer, right? So that's something you just work with the editor, how much they're willing to give. But there's a little bit more flexibility with the web only. And then for features, that's a whole different area. I think they run up to like 4,000 words, and there's a features director who, again, I would work with if there's a story that fits into that category. And so it could go anywhere from 800 words to 4,000 words, right? Depending on what it is that you're pitching. So, but typically most of the stories that I've seen come through so far are anywhere from 800 to like 1,500 words. I think 1,200 is a good cushion.
Yeah.
Good place.
And can you share your pay rates or range? And also, do you know if you pay on submission, acceptance, or publication?
Yeah. So right now it depends on what the content is. So I think we do have, I should put a little plug in here. We do have a submissions page on HCN's website. So it gives you all of the information of the types of things that we pitch, or the types of things you can pitch, topics, who you would pitch to, and just kind of some of these details that I'll share. So for reported content, it's $1 a word. And then for essays, it's 50 cents an essay or a review. But again, that's really, it can be at the discretion of the editor and what the content is. And so, I've been known to be a little bit flexible with that, depending on whatever the circumstances are. And so, and in some cases, we do offer reporting expenses. And so just, again, depends on what that is. But in terms of pay, typically it's pay on publication. And so whenever it publishes, we'll ask for an invoice, and we're able to pay that out typically at the beginning of the next week. So I think we pay out pretty quickly.
Great. That is great. And if this is maybe another question that depends, but just generally thinking about your editorial process, not just for your desk, but generally at High Country News, do you have a sense of how quickly people might respond to a pitch? And then from, yes, this sounds good, to actual publication, like what's a rough time frame that people might expect on average? Obviously, it really differs, as well as like, are there specific steps that we should think about being part of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. It does depend, one, on the editor, and two, on the content, and really typically how far along that pitch is. Does that pitch need reworking? Do we have more questions about that? Maybe it's not very clear, or it's vague. And those are things that, some editors are happy to chat with you about, in developing that. And typically I've seen that at High Country News. In terms of time and how quickly someone would get back to you, I can say that I think out of all of the editors there, I'm probably at the bottom of that list, if I'm going to be honest, because, we do get a lot of pitches, and I do a lot of things, and, this month alone, I'm traveling quite a bit. So, you're not going to hear from me right away in October, that's for sure. So I think it just depends. just I know some editors are very good at, they've got this actual window of saying like, let's not let this writer wait too long, and if somebody is being pretty persistent, then that's kind of, there's a sense of urgency there. And so I can't speak for all of the other editors, but I just, from what I've known in working with some of them, some are a lot faster at turning these things around than others, including myself. And so it's just, and to be honest, with Indigenous Affairs, it feels like there's that extra process, because we're not just thinking about the pitch, right? We're thinking about, what is the relationship, because that's a very important part in building trust with the community and making sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the community and the people. So I think it's a little bit more there, because we're not just saying, hey, like this is kind of missing from the pitch, or this is too broad. It's also, what are you doing? What's the kind of work? What, those kinds of things. And so, and some other things to consider are, if it is a story that's pegged to be in the print edition, it does have to go through a fact-checking process. Actually, they all go through fact-checking process, but this one's a little bit more lengthy, which is at the responsibility of the freelancer or the writer. And then I'll just say that we are known to have a very rigorous process in getting that story printed, but it's just because, and I think it's one of the things I appreciate about High Country News, because I myself have not worked at a place outside of Sports Illustrated that was that rigorous in the process and going through so many edits. And I think that some people do find that challenging, because it is a challenge. But I like to hope that they'll see the positives that come as a result of that, is that we're being very methodical and very thoughtful in the process. And so print magazine, the print edition, definitely go through a fact-checking process, and we provide the fact checker on that. And then you go through a copy edit. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. You go through edits through the edit with the editor, the immediate editor. Then it goes through a top edit. Then it goes through the fact-checking process, a copy edit, and then we take 2 more looks at it before it actually gets finalized. So yeah, so that's the process. And the fact-checking, I think, is something important for the writer to know that they're a big part of.
Yes, it sounds like a magazine. So my first magazine story I ever did, I was not prepared for the fact check. So I think it's so good to know going in, even when you're reporting, to, you keep your notes in a different order, way that when you're going to be fact checked at that kind of standard. So really helpful for folks to know. I also would love to, I don't know if you've had the freelance work published since you're relatively new in your role, but are there any examples of freelance pitches that you got that you think are a good, way to just highlight what you're looking for, or the type of work that you're hoping to publish? And if not, we can move on to another question.
Yeah, let's see. I think that for the desk, because I could easily focus the desk on areas that are of particular interest to me, but I try to move away from that and think about what is of interest in the Indigenous communities around me or within the West. And so I take a very good, if it's something that I think that maybe the person pitching the story is suggest that this is something the community sought them out for. They said, I want you to tell the story, we want to, and we did have, I can't disclose details of the one story that I'm thinking about, but, I pay particular attention to that for sure. But I think for an easier example, I think a good one might be, I just had a freelancer pitch one on an update actually to a story that she had written, having previously worked for HCN. This was before my time. And it was a story she had written about lithium mining on the Wallapai Reservation in Arizona. And so, she was paying attention to that. And, she clearly did her homework on that and was able to convey what was new about that, its significance at this point. And so, I think people could easily find some things that, we've published before and figure out what might be an update to that. It just kind of seems, obvious for me to say, well, covering a lot of the environmental things, like we obviously want that, like that's what HCN is kind of known for. But I also want to say that we're very much open to new things and to other things. I've been really trying to expand some of the things that we've been doing. I haven't had anything sports related. I'd love to see something like that. I've been doing a lot of the entertainment stuff in Indigenous country, or in Indian country, because that's what excites people, and it's exciting to see a lot of that happening, and it's a great time for that. And so just kind of listening up, what are we talking about? What are these communities paying attention to? And so I know that's a very broad, not specific example, but
no, it's a good charge to folks to be well sourced in Indigenous communities, and you'll pick up on what are the things that are getting folks excited.
And I will say, we haven't had a lot health related, and I think that I would love to see a little bit more of that, because it's a huge thing, and I've got stories in my back pocket that I've been thinking about too, that just I don't have the time to pursue. So yeah.
Great. And switching gears a bit, I'd love to talk about the Indigenous Journalists Association and your role on the board, but more broadly, what is your perspective on the climate for Indigenous journalists right now pursuing a career in this field? I'm guessing you have strong feelings about the need for mentorship and teaching. So I wanted to hear, where you think we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, oh God, this is going to sound like an aging myself kind of a comment, but, when I started in this field, it was such a thriving time for, a group of young Indigenous journalists, because we were young at the time. And people were getting opportunities here and there in mainstream. And granted, there weren't a lot of us, but we were there. And now it's such a different place, and it's in a good way. I think I see more than I've ever had before. I was kind of siloed at the Navajo Times and didn't really know what was happening out there. But since then, it's just expanded so much. And so it's so great to see and to meet new Indigenous reporters. So to me, that says that there are more of us out there. Even if it doesn't feel or look like it, we're there, which to me means that there are more opportunities for mainstream outlets and outlets in general to have that voice that has not or has been overlooked throughout the time, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a good time. It's a thriving time. And I think that there isn't all that much of a shortage of us. I say that very lightly, because there could be more of us, obviously. And I think that the part where it's kind of a miss is, providing opportunities for that, because I think at this point, knowing all of this, knowing how many of us are out there now available to do this work and able to do this work, that High Country News should not be one of the only places that has an Indigenous Affairs desk.
Yeah.
So I think that, to me, there's a miss there. And so there are so many of us, but the opportunities themselves are maybe just not there, or they're not aligning. And I think that just means that there's still a lot of room to expand in the industry as a whole. But I think for Indigenous journalists, like, we're ready, we're here, and we want to do this work. We've been doing this work for a very long time, but now there's just a few more of us. And I think we're a lot more visible than we've been. And obviously, I think that's a huge thanks to platforms that allow us to be out there and doing that work.
And if you had a message for those mainstream media, newsroom leaders who don't have an Indigenous Affairs desk, why should they? What is the value that they're missing?
Oh gosh, that's another hour. No, I think if you want to do it right, like I have to appeal. So this is where the degree comes into play. I have to appeal to, what mainstream journalists are looking for, or journalism is looking for, because it's very, very much, it can be very different than Indigenous journalism. Our goals and what we want don't always align. And so I think in journalism in the Western sense, if you want to do it right, that's what you have to do. Because to me, this is doing it right. Hiring the people who are from these communities, who are working in these communities, and who are the experts. I think that's the big thing, you know, as Western journalism loves that expert factual. You can't get any better, you know, a better expert on Indigenous issues than an Indigenous person. And so, you know, we often seek experts in different areas, right? We want scientists to comment on certain things. Well, why would you not want that for the work that you're putting out as well? And so I think that that's my $1 million pitch. Like, I think that I don't know that you need any other reason aside from, you know, just doing it right and doing it the best way possible, because I think that's what we're all trying to do. And, you know, there's not a lot that we can change with history as it relates to Indigenous people. But to me, this is one area where you can help with that change, because in the time before, historically, a lot of these stories were not told by Indigenous people. And so if you look at the work that we've done, the work that we can do, you can see why that's important. And so I think that it's not enough for me just to say why it's important. I think people have to actually kind of witness that and see what a difference it makes. And you do that by looking at our work. You do that by paying attention to, you know, what we're writing about, what we're saying, and what we think, what we're saying about the community wants people to know. And so, yeah.
Yes. And of course, the decisions that leaders are making now it's the history of tomorrow. So it's underlying your comment. I'm hearing a sense of responsibility to correct errors of the past. And it's sort of the ball is in the court of media leaders to do better.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I'll just add this last thing, and I think that's something I've always said about why I enjoy the work that we do as Indigenous journalists is that, you know, for a long time, and even still today, like, people have learned about Indigenous people from non-Indigenous people and perspectives. And so I'm very much about journalism being able to help fix that or to help change that. And, you know, I talked a little bit about, mildly mentioned my academic work, and that was the premise of it. It was using storytelling and using the importance of storytelling to teach students about their own identities, but also about having a hand in history. And so I think that this is our way of being able to do that. So you learn something about Indigenous people in the West, you learn something about Indigenous people in the West from a non-Indigenous perspective, and then you get to learn about it from an actual Indigenous person who's in the West. That you can't get any more fair, you know, if you ask me. And so I love to look at this work as doing just that.
Amazing. And yes, congratulations, Dr. Clahchischiligi, on your PhD in rhetoric. I'm very impressed, and I appreciate you sharing the reasoning for that. This has been such a great conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Let's see. I would like to say that I know that there's, you know, because we're the Indigenous Affairs Desk, it does not necessarily mean that we are only looking for Indigenous reporters. We would prefer that. It's our preference. Like, that is a very open, it's an out there known thing that it's our preference, because that's the whole premise of the desk. But those who are not Indigenous are welcome to provide pitches. They're welcome to, but they also should be aware that, you know, we are looking for something in particular. And when we do have advice, or if you're not given the go ahead with the pitch, or, you know, it's not something for us, you know, I think that's an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity, I think, on your part to figure out, well, how do I make better connections with this community so that when I come back around, that this is something that someone can see, that I'm not parachuting into the community, that I'm not just trying to benefit and get a byline from that. And so I really want to just let people know that, you know, if it doesn't fit into something that, you know, we might want, that should be a learning opportunity for you, to say, what can I do? Because it looks like I'm not doing enough, right? And so I just really wanted to be able to kind of drive that home. So
wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. What a pleasure talking with you. And thanks to everyone for joining us today.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
The Freelance Journalism Podcast is a production of the Institute for Independent Journalists. Our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of freelancers of color. Learn more about our work at theiij.com and use the code POD10 for a discount on our annual conference and other events open for registration now. That's POD number 10. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or both. You can find our free webinars and other offerings on YouTube. And your recommendation and sharing with friends is the greatest compliment and helps us discover new listeners. Thanks for listening.